Cape Coral did not set out to scare the rest of Florida. It started as a postcard, miles of canals, a mid-century dream given cul-de-sacs and docks, a place where the horizon seems to have more water than land. People came because they could. They came with spreadsheets and sunhats, with equity from colder zip codes and jobs that no longer required an office. For 2 long years, the story read like a victory lap. Closings inside a week, appraisal gaps stuffed with cash, builders booked out past the next holiday. Then, the rhythm broke. Not with a bang, but with a stack of small frictions that added up: premiums revised, roofs re-rated, reserves mandated, deductibles tied to replacement cost instead of wishful thinking. All at once, a city that had been shorthand for "it always sells" became the cautionary tale invoked in every South Florida listing appointment. If the governor looks rattled, it's because Cape Coral's chart now casts a shadow that touches Miami's towers, Naples' cul-de-sacs, and every lender memo south of Lake Okeechobee. The pipeline that fed the boom is easy to trace. It wasn't just retirees chasing sunshine. It was middle managers, cut loose from cubicles, nurses willing to swap shifts in states, 2-income households that could arbitrage a coastal salary against a Gulf Coast mortgage. A half hour on a Saturday Zillow session turned dreams into offers. Title companies learned to handle closings for buyers who had never set foot on the lanai they were purchasing. Inspectors learned how to triage as-is contracts that still wanted peace of mind. And sellers learned to be choosy. Highest and best by Thursday at noon wasn't arrogance, it was policy. The market rewarded decisiveness because delay had a price. There were tells. Insurance quotes that used to be an afterthought started arriving earlier and larger. Roof age, once a footnote, became a gatekeeper. Flood maps got revised in quiet PDF updates that agents forwarded with a grim emoji. Appraisers, squeezed between contract exuberance and comp reality, began to split the difference. But as long as money was cheap, buyers could make the math work by leaning on rate. When mortgage costs doubled, the blindfold came off. The line item everyone had skimmed, insurance, stepped into the spotlight and refused to exit. Families who had stretched for the granite started calculating wind deductibles as a percentage of coverage and wondered why they were discussing $20,000 before touching a single shingle. The transition from heat to fatigue shows up in small rituals. Lockboxes stop clicking every day. Back on market becomes a familiar badge beneath a listing photo. A staging company quietly lowers its rates to keep inventory moving. A builder's sales trailer, once a scene of crammed weekend tours, sits empty on Tuesday and Wednesday. The same street where 4 caravans once idled behind an agent's SUV now hosts a solitary sedan and a buyer with a clipboard. Cape Coral learned those rituals first, and everyone else took notes. It is tempting to narrate all of this as greed or fear, but the mechanics are duller and therefore truer. On the way up, the market pulled demand forward. People who planned to buy next year bought this month because rates were 3 and the office was optional. On the way down, the market pushed demand back. People who could buy this month decided to wait because the insurance binder felt like a second mortgage, and the HOA budget, once skimmed, read like a cautionary prospectus. That pull-push dynamic is as old as housing cycles. What's newer is the way risk is being priced in real time, building by building. Condo stories from South Florida tend to star glass at Skyline, but the most consequential paragraphs are in budgets and engineering reports. Boards that once tolerated deferred maintenance discovered that the era of "we'll handle that next year" ended. Reserves that lived as polite aspirations on a spreadsheet had to become cash. The premium for the master policy doubled, then doubled again. The line for concrete restoration moved from rumor to invoice. Lenders took those PDFs as seriously as appraisers took comps. If the association couldn't prove it had the money to do the work, the building's units became cash only. And the moment a building becomes cash only, the universe of buyers shrinks to those who can absorb both a purchase and a monthly number that looks like rent on a nice apartment. Cape Coral doesn't have high-rise problems, but its shock taught the towers a lesson. Liquidity does not survive documentation surprises. Cape Coral's single-family inventory for a while seemed like a conundrum that better staging could solve. Then it revealed itself as a supply curve that had shifted. A place with 800 active listings in the frenzy blinked and had several thousand. That transition is not simply more signs in yards. It is leverage changing hands. Negotiation, which felt taboo in 2021, came back with a grudge. Buyers asked for money at closing and got it. They asked for roof credits and got those too. They asked for the seller to pay points, and the answer more and more was yes. Realtors who taught clients to waive contingencies taught a different vocabulary: inspection period, insurance binder contingency, rate lock expiration, and seller contributions. It felt like a new language because the old one had stopped working. The human stories behind the percentages never fit into neat charts. A couple who moved from the Midwest in 2021 because telework finally permitted it finds their renewal premium near the size of their original mortgage. They told the contractor to hold off on the pool cage to manage cash flow. Now they tell the agent to run a CMA and promise they won't give it away, then approve a $25,000 price reduction 2 weeks later because there are 3 similar houses within a mile, all slightly cheaper, all unsold. A first-time buyer who brought 3.5% down on a FHA loan and a box full of optimism now has less equity than closing costs would require to exit. A landlord who underwrote a nightly rate assuming occupancy learned that 4 new short-term rental houses on the same block can cut gross revenue in half without ever filing a notice. The political urgency grows from awkward arithmetic. A state can pass reforms to dampen litigation, subsidize reinsurance tranches, and encourage mitigation upgrades with credits. Those can help, they do. But reforms touch the volatility around the edges, while a new baseline sets in. That new baseline is a recognition that the true, long-run cost of owning near coasts and canals isn't what we pretended in the era of free money. It includes a carry cost, with a capital C, not only principal and interest, but taxes, insurance that behaves like a variable rate instrument, HOA dues that reflect engineering realities, and a deductible calibrated to storms that can be named on a first-name basis. In that world, Cape Coral pricing turns into a verb. A listing in Naples gets Cape Coraled when the comp the owner wants to use is 2022, and the comp the appraiser must use is last month's reduction 5 streets over. A Broward lender memo references Cape exposure when tightening overlays for homes east of a certain elevation. An agent in Boca tells a seller that the market is reading Cape Coral and waiting for us to blink, and the seller, who vowed never to cut, reduces twice in 6 weeks. Fair or not, the narrative has a speed that data often lacks. People don't need a state report to act, they need a headline and a friend's anecdote. From the street level, the texture of the market reveals the psychology. Days on market is no longer social proof against a house, it's leverage. If a house has been listed 60 days, buyers treat it like a conversation rather than a prize. If it's been 120 days, they treat it like a rescue mission. The old flirtations love letters to sellers, promises to name a pet after the house gave way to inspection addenda and closing credits that look like car stickers. A seller offering to cover a full year of HOA dues would have sounded ridiculous in 2021. In 2025, it sounds prudent and sometimes necessary. Cape Coral's permit pause did something subtle to investor logic. It reminded capital that not every pipeline is up to the load. When a city pumps the brakes to review drainage, you are watching municipal risk management in action. The headline reads, "Permit freeze." But the margin note reads, "Time is now, a cost on par with materials." Investors who touted quick turns learned to price time again. Builders who achieved scale by building ahead of absorptions learned to carry inventory in a market that punishes inventory. And buyers learned that a new house can still carry the bureaucratic dust of the process that produced it. On the water, the story shifts with the tide. A canal that felt like a privilege began to feel like a variable. What's the elevation? Now comes before, what's the view? A bulkhead inspection can kill a romance. Flood vents stand between "will pass" and "will try." Insurance brokers attend showings by speakerphone and speak like underwriters. Roof age, secondary water resistance, shutter ratings, hip versus gable. These are not romantic words. They are survival words in a market that finally priced the realities everyone had joked about at cocktail parties and then ignored on the disclosures. For South Florida, the cascade is not hypothetical. When Cape Coral's inventory bulged, developers from Collier to Broward watched cancellation rates and quietly revived incentive sheets they thought they'd shredded. When Cape Coral's prices revised, appraisers across counties updated the paired sales models that sit under their opinions. When Cape Coral's negative equity rose, servicers in other metros reviewed watch lists for modifications before they become delinquency. No single number is destiny, but a cluster of them can change behavior. Buyers reinvented their playbook in response. The process now begins in a spreadsheet rather than a mood board. Insurance estimates are requested with parcel IDs before the first showing. 4-point and wind mitigation reports are ordered during the option period, not after. HOA financials are not just collected, they're read. Reserve studies are not just photographed, they're decoded. Flood zones are cross-checked against recent map changes, and an elevation certificate is treated like a passport. Deals are built around contingencies that sound tedious because someone who bid on emotion 18 months ago now has a friend stuck in a house they can't exit. Caution is not fear, it is a learned response. Sellers, for their part, found a strange comfort in brutal honesty. The fastest closings now happen in houses with pre-inspections, roof permits in hand, insurance quotes in the listing packet, and recent mitigation credits stapled to the back. The mystery that once fueled buzz now fuels suspicion. If a roof is old, pricing reflects it. If a panel needs replacement, the estimate appears in the MLS rather than an explanation in week 5. Treating buyers as partners rather than competitors sounds soft, but it moves contracts from signed to funded while the other houses wait for their second price cut. The rental market did not rescue everyone who couldn't sell. Long-term tenants, squeezed by their own budgets, resisted large increases. Short-term stays, swamped by supply, underperformed projections. Investors who considered a pivot from sell to rent confronted an awkward pair of curves. Purchase costs inching up, income per door inching down. Some capitulated and sold at losses, preferring a known hit to a slow bleed. Others doubled down, betting that a year or two of pain would reset the math when inventory cleared and premiums stabilized. Both strategies make sense, depending on horizon and balance sheet. The trap lies in pretending that time is free. Policy can still matter. Credits for hardening homes work. Fewer lawsuits make it easier for carriers to price the future. A state backstop for reinsurance is not an indulgence. It is acknowledgement that global capital needs a local partner when the actuarial tables scream. But policy cannot change the physics of wind or water or concrete. It can only encourage behavior that aligns a house with those physics sooner, cheaper, and with fewer surprises to the family that sleeps inside. The panic ascribed to the governor is in part a replay of a familiar scene. A leader standing between the electorate and a spreadsheet. Voters want relief, markets want price, storms want indifference. In that three-way tug, the only sustainable victory lies in making the house itself better. Better roof, better anchoring, better windows, better drainage, better reserves. That is not a TV soundbite, but it is what reinsurers respect, what lenders reward, and what buyers recognize when they flip through disclosures. Cape Coral's lesson is not that Florida is unlivable, it is that Florida is unforgiving when you treat risk like a rounding error. Drive the late afternoon loop through neighborhoods that were sold out in 2021, and you'll see the mood on display. Lawns still clipped, kids still biking, a lab chasing a ball across a side yard. But in the real estate details, small signs. A second price rider screwed beneath the first. A seller will contribute to rate buy-down in print too large to miss. A flyer with an insurance estimate attached by a paperclip, you read the recalibration. In kitchens, couples talk about carrying for one more season and renting the spare bedroom. Conversations people didn't have when appreciation felt like a guarantee. A block over, an older couple stares at a spreadsheet with 2 columns. Stay and sell. Neither column looks like the dream. Both columns look like adulthood. South Florida's higher-rise life is just as sober now. A condo with a sweeping view and a boutique lobby sells if the board can hand a buyer a binder. completed milestone inspections, reserves funded according to law, a clean master policy, predictable dues. A similar view without those pages lingers, and then sells for a number that resets the whole stack's comps. Lenders and buyers alike have learned not to be starstruck. They look past the marble to the minutes of the last board meeting. It sounds boring. It is also the difference between a funded loan and a voided contract. Cape Coral's next chapter probably won't be spectacular. It will be incremental. 1,000 roofs replaced, 1,000 panels updated, 1,000 premiums trimmed through mitigation, 1,000 price reductions that clear the pipe, 1,000 appraisals written on comps that don't point down quite so sharply. You will not see the turn on TV. You will feel it when a back-on-market banner appears less often and a buyer offers list price without a request for closing credits the size of a car. If the rest of South Florida wants that same turn, the recipe is not mysterious. Finish the work, fund the reserves, price the risk, tell the truth. A final thought that the charts rarely capture. People didn't move here by accident. They chose this light, this breeze, this uneven line where land meets water. That won't change. What will change is the entry fee and the documentation required at the door. The Florida that sold itself on optimism now asks for receipts. Cape Coral's crash was the audit that forced the issue. The cities watching from Miami to Jupiter can treat that audit as humiliation or instruction. If they take it as instruction, the next headline will be dull in the best way. Market stabilizes after expensive honesty. And if the governor still looks rattled, let him. The point isn't to calm a podium, it's to steady a closing table.